It's horse beef. What's going on, guys? Today I'm ranking the best fights of 2024. This is probably the one I've been looking forward to doing the most. It's the one I'm most passionate about. I do love a good barn burner, I must say. And as you can see, the rating scale war, barn burner, slobber knocker, certified horse beef classics. But then there's only one spot for that fight of the year. So I'm going to be ranking all the fights that I believe deserve to be represented here. It's not a massive list, but it's pretty extensive. I have picked out my personal favorite fights that took place in 2024. So you might disagree with some of the placements. You might even disagree with some of the inclusions on this list. So if I left out one that you expected to be on this list or you wanted to be on this list, then I recommend that you let me know in the comment section below. And also rank your top 5, top 10 best fights of the year. Let me know your favorite fight of the year, whatever it may be. Just let me know your thoughts, right, on the video itself as well. So let's move on to the very first one here. We have Irene Aldana versus Norma Dumont. Now, my personal favorite female fighter of all time, Irene Aldana, got her shit kicked in here, but the toughness, the blood, the nasty fucking cut, and the fact that she actually just kept walking forward despite having half of her face hanging off. Norma Dumont was slinging hammers. Irene Aldana was slinging left hooks over and over again, trying to work the body. But Norma Dumont was just here for it, man, and she was never out of there. But same thing goes for Irene Aldana, despite having, as I said, half of her face hanging off. So I have to give this one a lot of respect. Is it one of the best fights of the year? Yes. Is it an elite fight of this year when ranked against all the rest of the best fights of the year? Not necessarily, but I would say because of the shock factor, the fact that this was such a good fight, despite Irene Aldana looking like she had no right to even continue, right? How the fuck are doctors looking at Colby Covington's eyelid being cut open and stopping the fight, but then the Irene Aldana-Dumont fight was not stopped, even though the cut looked, I would say, infinitely worse than Colby's. I get the location of the cut on Colby was different, but yeah, this fight is just a fucking war, although I am ranking it in barn burner at the end of the day. Then we have Alex Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree. Now this one, I would put this one in certified horse beef classics, and the reason being is because there's a big shock, right? We saw Alex Pereira push or be pushed by somebody that I think a lot of people were expecting him to just walk through. And it was a genuinely fantastic high-level fight. Alex Pereira reaching flow state right before the finish was a thing of beauty. And it was just a back-and-forth war until it was just a one-sided beatdown. And as you guys know, one-sided beatdowns usually push great fights down the list quite a bit, right? I do like more of an evenly contested match. This fight was that until it wasn't. Although when I do think about it, does it deserve to be ranked under certified horse beef classics? I would say it does. I think it's one of the best title fights in recent memory, right? Both guys just went to war. Then we get into Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. Now, aside from the first round where Jim Miller did have some moments, this was mostly a one-sided beatdown, but it was a barn burner, and Jim Miller did have moments. There was even a moment in the third round where he was getting busted up where it looked like he actually hurt Bobby Green, so he was never out of it. And this just looked like the case of both of them resigning themselves to the fact that they both want that $300K fight of the night bonus, you know. And I'm pretty sure they got it too, and if they didn't, well, they fucking should have, because this probably was the best fight on that card, other than maybe another one that will be shown pretty soon. But this one I would put under barn burner. I think this was a fantastic fight. Then we get Cub Swanson versus Billy Quarantillo. This is the most recent one on the entire list. Cub Swanson, I mean, that knockout in and of itself will be represented on my best knockouts of 2024 tier list, believe me, because it was a fucking bomb of a right hand, right? And just to see Cub Swanson go to war like this at his age, at the age of 31, against a certified warrior like Billy Quarantillo, right? Billy Quarantillo always comes to bang, and he did. And unfortunately, unfortunately for himself, fortunately for all of us, right? He was slept. Not to say that Billy Quarantillo deserves to be slept, but just to see a veteran, right? An all-timer like Cub Swanson get it done like that at his age and potentially his last fight was a thing of beauty. And it was a great fight, it was. But for me, it only deserves to be ranked at war. Then we have Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. I think I'll put this one at slobber knocker. It is up there for me because as far as title fights, this is another super memorable one. And I'm just glad that, like, even though I'm the biggest Izzy hater potentially in the world, right? I'm not a huge fan of Izzy whatsoever. When he is forced to fight, he is really fun to watch. And I can't deny that. I really just can't deny that. He's a super fun fighter to watch. Dricus, goaded him into a war. He obliged. Dricus du Plessis came out on top. This was an awesome back and forth fight. But, I'm going to rank it at slobber knocker. I think that's a fair placement there. Then we get into Darren Elkins versus Daniel Pineda. Essentially, two of the same fighters. These are just two gritty, well-rounded warriors. Like two guys that aren't necessarily great at anything, but are just both tough as nails, crazy chins. Both guys bleeding profusely by the end of it. Sick fight. I love this fight. I honestly did. It had everything that you can really want in a fight. So I'm going to put this one at slobber knocker. I think it was an absolute banger. Then we get Ribovics versus Zellehuber. Now this one, I'm going to keep it at fight of the year for now as a placeholder. There are a couple other fights that come to mind that I feel do challenge this as far as being the fight of the year. But as things stand, this is the best fight of the year until we maybe ponder it over a couple of other fights. But man, like, do I have to really explain it? The moments, the knockdowns, the insane moment in round 3 when Ribovics rocks Zellehuber. Then it's just a back and forth brawl for the remainder of it. Ribovics looked amazing in this fight, but so did Daniel Zellehuber. It could have gone either way, I suppose, but I think Ribovics deserved the win. I think if it wasn't for that moment at the end of the third, then it could have been anyone's fight, really. But I think Ribovics secured it with that, but it was still very back and forth, very close, and the definition of a fight of the year candidate. This fight was ridiculous. It was just fucking ridiculous. Like, what else can I say, really? Then we get into Jan versus Figgy. Now, this is my personal favorite fight of the year, although I can't with good conscience say just outright it's the fight of the year, although it's up there for me. I think this is probably like a top 3 favorite fights of the year. The high-level action, very, very technical, although it was mostly one-sided. You know what I mean? Like, once Jan grew into the fight, after he was tripped in the first round, like once he got back to his feet, the fight was almost completely Jan's, although Figgy was in it enough to make this such a great fight. So I can't bring it down the list because of that, although the one-sided, like the somewhat one-sided nature of it keeps it from being fight of the year for me. But as far as just like technical masterclasses, like, because I will rank the best performances of the year, so you can maybe expect Peter Yan to have the performance of the year. But as far as fight of the year, Figgy was good enough. He was tough enough to stay in that, but it was mostly a one-sided beatdown from the greatest fighter in the world, Peter Yan. Then we get into Dan Hooker versus Mateusz Gamrot. This was a sick fight. Very unexpected. Both men had moments on the feet. Surprisingly, I expected it to be all Dan Hooker on the feet and Gamrot to just ragdoll him. It was not the case. Dan Hooker ended up walking down Mateusz Gamrot in the end, although it was just a beautiful display from both men. This was a slobber knocker. It really was. It was a fucking slobber knocker. These guys went to war. It was great to see Gamrot really bite down on the mouthpiece and slug it out like we're not used to seeing him do it. Mostly, when we get entertaining Gamrot fights, it's due to the grappling exchanges, but this time we actually saw someone able to deal with the takedowns of Gamrot and put it on him, and honestly, I was just very surprised by the performance of Dan Hooker. It looked like he'd been on the decline for so long. This was a great comeback performance for him, and put it on one of the elite wrestlers at the 155-pound division. Beautiful fight. Then we get into Yuri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic. Now, not a very long fight. I believe it was stopped near the middle of the second round, but this was such a banger, dude. It was all Rakic pretty much for the entire first round. Yuri Prochazka just ends up getting frustrated by getting hit so much that he ends up just putting his hands even lower and allowing even more shots to land on his chin, like the absolute Chad that he is. Just walks down Rakic, lands his shots, and it was just a brutal beating. Once he got Rakic to the ground, it was a brutal beating. He was trying to crawl away from Yuri. Yuri's pulling him backwards and ground and pounding him. Thing of beauty. Yuri Prochazka is immune to being in a boring fight, and this is just another example of that. And I would say this one falls under the category of slobber knocker. Then we have another potential placeholder for fight of the year that I am going to keep up here right now. This is one of the only fights here that I think contends with Ribovics versus Zellehuber for being fight of the year. Arguably, I'm not saying this is the best title fight of all time, but it's up there for me. It's easily a top 3. It's up there with Jones versus Gustafsson, and I'm honestly having trouble thinking about any other title fights that were better than this one. This fight, it contained everything that you could ever want: high-level striking, high-level grappling exchanges, right? A surprising advantage on the feet from Islam, and then a surprising ability for Dustin Poirier to deal with the grappling pretty well of Islam, despite the fact that Islam did pull off a beautiful finish towards the end of the fight. But still, the fact that it was finished in the 5th round and we got such high-level action leading up to it, This fight was, in my opinion, a masterpiece. It was perfect, just a beautiful fight from start to finish. I loved it. So this is another placeholder for Fight of the Year. And remember, there will only be one place for Fight of the Year by the end of this video here. And then we have another placeholder for Fight of the Year in Uoralbay versus Mateusz Rebecki. Now, I think these are the only 3 fights that fit the bill for me as far as Fight of the Year goes. And I'll really pit them against each other towards the end of the video and then choose one. But at the very least, all of these fights on the current Fight of the Year placement are certified horse beef classics at the very least. Then we have Mauricio Rufy versus James Lawntop. Now, this was probably only a war because James Lawntop looked like he was just a lot bigger than Rufy in here. I feel like Rufy would have KO'd him if James was on weight, potentially, and if he was able to cut more weight, then I think he would have been put out by Rufy. But I'd say thankfully for us, because we ended up receiving an amazing fight in the process. Rufy was tested here. He was not fraud checked by any means. Just because he didn't KO Lawntop at any point does not mean that he was fraud checked. No, he looked amazing. He looked honestly at his stylish best here, and I'm still excited to see the future of Mauricio Rufy. And I love the fact that we got a Fight of the Year contender from Mauricio Rufy. Beautiful fight. I would say it was just beautiful from start to end, and I'm going to stick this one in war. Then we get Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje. For a lot of people, this is the Fight of the Year. For me, the knockout really bumps this fight up quite a bit. All the meat and potatoes leading up to the knockout wasn't quite as entertaining as some people have said. There were great moments throughout this fight, but it was mostly one-way traffic. And for that reason, I'm going to put it in slobber knocker. I actually don't even know if this is a certified horse beef classic. I do think it is because of the knockout, right? Because of the high of that knockout, right? It'll be very, very difficult for any fight to produce that kind of high. But we're not talking about the best knockouts of the year. We're talking about the best fights of the year. And this fight, for the most part, was one-way traffic, right? And leading up to the nose break, it wasn't even just the nose break. It was just a great performance from Max from start to finish. And he was just, I would say, a level above Justin Gaethje throughout the whole fight. So that's why it's knocked down to slobber knocker. As far as the best performances of the year, like I said with the Jan Figge fight, it may not be the greatest fight of 2024, but contained potentially one of the best performances of the year, one of the best performances of all time. And it's just crazy that Max Holloway has so many of those all-time performances under his belt. Just such an elite fighter, such a legend, even though he was knocked out by Ilia Topuria. Erceg versus Pantoja. This was a sick fight. It was a really sick fight. I'm just going to put it under barn burner because there was a bit of stalling, a bit of land prey in there, but the exchanges on the feet were a lot of fun. Some of the grappling exchanges were a lot of fun, and just the fact that Erceg was able to stick in there with someone who's as elite as Pantoja. Like, I would say, despite the fact that Erceg was KO'd by Kai Kara-France after this, right? I still feel like this loss ages very well for Erceg, considering how elite Pantoja's looked since then. He's beaten all of his opponents after beating Erceg. I believe that was earlier in the year, and since then he's beaten Royval and Asakura since then. And I know Royval did give him some problems, but he just dealt with Asakura very easily. So I think Erceg, him versus Asakura, honestly, on paper, is a banging fight. Or him versus Royval, I think, should take place next. But yeah, the fact that Erceg was able to stick in there with Pantoja, I know some people would say that this fight maybe is disqualified because of a blatant robbery, which some people would say was a blatant robbery. I disagree. I think this fight was extremely close, and giving it to Pantoja, in my opinion, does make sense. It does honestly make sense, although it was very, very close. And Steve Erceg should be very proud of his performance. And he put up a great striking display. He really did. Like, his striking looked like some of the best in the UFC. He has some of the best hands in the UFC. He just has to go out there and show it, man. And I think him versus Asakura. Like, I know this isn't the matchups video, but just give us Erceg versus Asakura. That'd be a sick fight. Then we get Peter Yan versus Song Yadong, and I think I'll put this one in war as well. It was just very technical, was pretty fast paced. Although we didn't get the best version of Peter Yan that I think we could have gotten, because he did come into that fight with some injuries, right? Groin injury, I believe. I think a knee injury as well. And those injuries were exacerbated mid-fight. And you could see it with his movement, right? The fact that he wasn't switching stances as often or as effectively. His kicks weren't as effective as they have been, or as fast as they have been. Honestly, he just looked generally slower, but the fact that he was still a pace and a level above Song Yadong throughout this fight, and he really grew into it. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch, right? Jan slowly gained his confidence back over time, but and it wasn't really one-sided, although Jan clearly won, and it was a great fight from start to end, I would say. Then we get Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. And I think while this fight was taking place, it was an absolute banger, although pretty short. The first fight was one-way traffic from BSD, just walking down Poirier. Poirier was landing some pretty good shots that I think the commentators were either not catching or just completely ignoring. And then in the second round, it was just very clear who the better striker was, and the differential between the two of them on the feet was just too much, as like anyone with logical thinking would have predicted. Like Benoit Saint-Denis was never ready to go up against Poirier, but at least they gave us such a great fight until it was over. So respect to BSD, respect to Poirier. So two fight of the year contenders on here for Dustin Poirier. As is to be expected, almost every single one of Poirier's fights are going to contend for the fight of the year in any given year that he performs, because he's that much of a goddamn warrior and entertaining fighter, one of the most entertaining fighters of all time. Then we get Tatsuro Taira versus Royval. This one was super high level. I actually love this fight. I love this fight. I think it was really good. Super fun grappling exchanges, as you can expect from Taira and Royval, and a beautiful display of boxing on the feet from Royval, and great show of respect at the very end, man. Awesome fight. This one is an absolute slobber knocker. I would say pushing the limits of being a certified horse beef classic. Then we get into Cannonier versus Borralho. Now, for me, this one might even be a certified horse beef classic, and I am fighting the urge to put it there. I might actually do that. But for now, I'm going to keep it in slobber knocker. I feel like it was just such an underrated fight. In the conversation of best fights of the year, I feel like people aren't really talking about this one too much. It was sick, right? The fact that Kyle Borralho dropped Cannonier at the end of the fifth. I know some people may have thought that this was just one-way traffic from Borralho, but Borralho was busted up in this one. Cannonier was throwing bombs. They were both in it from start to the end of it, and it was just a really fun back and forth war. I love this fight. I think Kyle Borralho, he's not the best fighting nerd, but he's actually the highest profile one as things stand. But I think we saw in here, or in this fight, that maybe Borralho isn't as elite as we thought, because I feel like he should have had an easier time with Cannonier if he was meant to be as elite as he's being pushed as. You know what I'm saying? But at least we got to see the warrior spirit from Kyle Borralho and see him like really tested by a veteran like Jared Cannonier. And it was a great fight at the end of the day. We get into Joshua Van versus Edgar Chairez. I'm sticking this one directly in Certified Horse Beef Classic. This is one of my personal favorite fights of the year. The boxing on display from both men, the exchanges, everything about this fight was fucking bananas from beginning to end. There's a moment where Joshua Van was just piecing up Chairez on the feet. Chairez eating it with his Mexican shin. I think he lands a spinning elbow at one point and then wobbles Joshua Van back, and then he has him on the back foot. This fight was ridiculous. It was a fight from a movie, like straight out of an Undisputed movie. If you've seen that franchise, then you know what I'm talking about. If not, then look it up, because this is the kind of fight that you'd see in a movie like that. It was ridiculous. Absolutely a certified horse beef classic. Then we get into Robert Whitaker versus Paulo Costa. Now, I'll say this one was a barn burner. Sick fight, definitely worthy of being ranked on this tier list. It was awesome, right? But it was mostly one-sided. Like, Paulo Costa was landing some good leg kicks on Whitaker, but most of the significant strikes after that wheel kick landed at the end of round one, it was mostly Robert Whitaker, but it was still competitive enough to the point where I can rank it at barn burner. I think this is a really fun high-level fight. And surprisingly, too, like, I thought it would just be a one-sided beatdown from Whitaker, but Paulo Costa showed that he can still hang in there with the best of the best. But at the same time, he fucking can't. He's just such a weird fighter, but he has produced some absolute bangers for us, so I have to give respect to Paulo Costa. And he's hilarious on Twitter, so he gets my respect anyway. Then we get into Waters versus Goff. This was a very fun fight, very under-the-radar fight as well, although not the highest level fight you could ask for. The action was constant. These guys went to absolute war. It was grueling. They were both gassed by the end of it. And I just love seeing two guys that are absolutely gassed bite down on the mouthpiece and sling. Although, not like as I said, not the highest level action that we saw all year, although definitely worthy of being represented on this list, because it was a war at the end of the day, one of the best fights of the year. Then we get into Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland. Now, I will put this one at war as well. I don't think it's deserving of being anywhere else. It was a good fight, but we did get the symptoms of a Sean Strickland fight throughout a lot of this one, and it's a good reason why a lot of people thought that Sean Strickland was robbed. It's because we saw him spam jabs and bust up the eye of Dricus. A lot of this fight wasn't very entertaining. A lot of it was Sean just jabbing Dricus, and Dricus returning with big overhands that may or may not have been landing. And it wasn't really a super, super entertaining fight up until the 5th round when they both decided to just go to war. I know there was bloodshed and all that, but at the end of the day, this was pretty close to a typical Strickland fight with a very, very game competitor in Dricus. So for me, it was all Dricus that made this fight worthy of even being on this list in the first place. So this one I think deserves to be in war. Then we get into Movsar Evloev versus Arnold Allen, another pretty underrated scrap that took place this year. Fun grappling exchanges, pretty fun striking exchanges too. And Movsar, I think, showed that he can strike, man. Right? I've taken a lot away from Movsar's skill set, but he proved me wrong in this fight. He actually busted up Allen on a couple of occasions and had him hurt on the feet, which was surprising. And I think this fight doesn't get enough credit for how much of a banger it actually was. So I have to rank it here at war. Then we get into Jean Silva versus Drew Dober. Now, this one was crazy. It was crazy, but I don't think it can be ranked anywhere above war because it was too one-sided, right? There were some big shots being thrown from Dober, and he did land a few of them, but for the most part, it was just John Silva having his way with Dober, and Dober, as always, displayed one of the craziest chins of all time. That cut, man, the cut that he sustained is one of the nastiest of all time as well. If that crazy cut Tyrion Aldana never took place in 2024, that would have been the craziest cut of the year, but unfortunately for him, he's not able to go home with that award there. But at least he provided us an amazing fight and stuck in there and showed how tough he was, but that was really all it was from Dober. It was mostly a one-sided beatdown, but because of how tough Dober was, this was a very entertaining fight. And it wasn't as sad as it could have been, but I was still sad as a Drew Dober fan. I even picked him to beat Jean Silva just out of love for Drew Dober, although the lack of melanin on Jean Silva should have really, really told the full story of what was going to happen in this fight, if you know what I'm saying. Then we get into City versus Tavares. Now, this was a war, and I would say the same thing that I said with Waters versus Joff. It was a very fun fight. It was a war. Both men bit down on the mouthpiece and really left it all out there, but it just wasn't the highest level action, so I have to relegate it a little bit. But this was a war, and I think it was the second time they fought as well. But City, he showed, and he actually lives very, very close to me, City, and he trains at a gym very close to me, which is great. So, I'm hoping for the best for City's career, and I think, he's displayed a lot of promise. He's tough as nails, solid striker, and he's just good, man. And this fight, I think, was a great showcase for him of his toughness and really his overall skill set, even though he lost this fight. But obviously credit has to be given to Tavares for actually winning the fucking fight. But it was great nonetheless. And that does conclude my placements on this list, and now we will decide who the fight of the year actually belongs to. Now, this is very tough, man, because Zellehuber versus Ribovics is the definition of a fight of the year, right? These guys absolutely slung, and as far as the third round goes, it's the greatest round of the year, 100%. Hebechki versus Uoralbay, another one that deserves all the credit in the world for the absolute war that these went to. So I'm actually going to move this one down. It is a certified horse beef classic, absolutely 100%. Uoralbay versus Hebechki, another one, certified horse beef classic at the very least. But when it comes to Dustin Poirier and Islam Makhachev, the fact that it was a 5-round war in a title fight, super, super high level action, right? Both men bleeding. Dustin cut open Islam, right? He had moments of his own, right? Islam would clinch up with Dustin. He would just start ripping shots to the body and lift up Islam and push him off of him. Those moments were amazing, right? The clinch striking from Islam was so elite, and just his ability to find that submission, right? The ankle pick and then the Darce in the 5th round, really pulled it out the mud like that. Just to see Islam go to war with someone like Dustin Poirier was a thing of beauty because I think a lot of people were expecting the opposite to happen. If it became a war, Dustin could potentially have success, but Islam obliged, and I love that. So maybe I'm off a little bit with this one, right? Because the action wasn't as violent, right? It wasn't just sheer violence like we saw with Ribovics and Zellehuber and with Uoralbay and Rebechki. So I'm going to move Uoralbay and Rebechki and award Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier with my 2024 fight of the year. As exciting as Uoralbay and Rebechki, Zellehuber and Ribovics were, right? They may even be more exciting than this, but the implication, the aura surrounding a title fight, and the fact that both these men threw down the way that they did, and we got everything that you could ever ask for in MMA. It's one of the best fights of all time, one of the best title fights of all time, at least a top 3 one for me. Also, being such a big fan of Dustin Poirier does help his case as well. I'm just a sucker for such a banging Dustin Poirier war. I love to see him. But anyway, guys, yes, that is my fight of the year. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments section below, and let me know any of your thoughts overall. And let me know your fight of the year, top 5, top 10. Like I said at the beginning of the video, please let me know in the comments section below. And as always, guys, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you on the next one.